Hello, everyone. Welcome to all of our attendees today. Thank you for joining from all over the world. Obviously, some from Switzerland, some from the UK, maybe other countries as well. One housekeeping item at the beginning: the session will be recorded. So if you have to drop off early, we will send out the link to the recording probably tomorrow, early tomorrow. Yes, for the session today, I'm happy to welcome Leslie Forbes, who is a channel sales engineer at Axonius, and he will have a technical session today again. So different to many of our other sessions that are more on a approach and strategic side. We will have a technical session today, and Leslie will talk about asset management, which is an age-old problem. And we have many conversations with many customers who are really frustrated. But there is hope, there is a solution, and Leslie will show us a lot of use cases, a lot of really practical stuff to get you an idea how to solve this age-old problem. We opened the Q&A section, so if you have any questions, just please type them into the Q&A, and I will interrupt Leslie if it's fitting, and make sure that your specific questions are answered during the session. So Leslie, go ahead. The stage is yours.
Thanks, Lars. It's nice to be back. It's nice to be back with you and your team, and all of the people on the webinar, and everybody who's going to listen to it afterwards. Hopefully this is one of those enduring things. I remember hearing something like that. Let's go back and listen to that thing. I really hope I can show something that's worth looking back at in 6 months' time or a year's time, or whenever people find it really useful. So let's share and see how we can get moving on this thing. So yeah, I'm Leslie Forbes, and I work with Axonius. I've been around for a while, so I know quite a bit about this technology. I love it. And the discussion that we're going to have today, and I really hope it's a discussion. I've got lots to show and lots to talk about, but it's this thing that Lars mentioned. It is an age-old problem, knowing where all of the devices are. And I mean, it's kind of one of those classic things, you can't protect what you don't know you've got. So that's why there is this concept of the asset management mandate. And the broader question is, to whom does this mandate belong? And in reality, it's everyone. It's everyone in the business, because everybody's using some form of technology in order to, should we just say, run the business. But why is it such a big challenge still in 2024? So this tweet kind of highlights this discussion. I mean, yes, it's an old tweet, it's 6 years old, but it could just as well have been tweeted yesterday or today even. So it's the typical question: how many devices, or how many Windows devices do we have? Everybody's got a different answer. And which one of those is right? I'd argue that they're all right. They're all right from their own point of view. So the AV guy says 7864. Yes, that's what my EDR platform tells me. The desktop management guys say, yes, Active Directory has got these 6,321 devices in, and so on. So they're all accurate in their own right. But what problem does that present then? It presents the obvious problem that with this proliferation of all of these platforms, solutions, management capabilities, they're all siloed in their own space. So whether you're using a McAfee or an Active Directory or a Jam for a VMware, or any one of these management solutions that are a selection of what we've got here, each one has done its job properly, and the operators of those platforms trust them inherently. So the Fortinet firewall guy trusts his platform. He trusts the data that's in there. But how do we know that the devices which are showing up on Fortinet are the exact same devices that come from the aggregation of VMware and Windows desktops inside of our business? There's no assurance of that whatsoever. So there is a solution to this problem, and that is with Axonius. So this is what I'm going to show you today, is this platform that Axonius has developed. It does three things, and it does three things exceptionally well. It aggregates, correlates, normalizes devices, and produces a credible, comprehensive asset inventory of everything that's all around from all of these various solutions. Take note that this is nothing to do with agents. We're not talking about agents here at all. We're talking about sourcing the data from all of these variety of platforms. 99.999% of all of those platforms have an API, which we can use to query those platforms for all of their device data, user data, SaaS applications, firewall policies, everything that you can imagine that forms part of an asset picture inside of the business. That's the first thing that it does exceptionally well. The second thing which it does exceptionally well is find where there are gaps. I will show you distinctly how we do that in just a few minutes. And the third thing is, once we've found those things, which are, the so-called gap, or the things that need acting on, we have got a mechanism called Enforcement Center, which enables us to validate and enforce policies that are in place in the business. So with that in mind, let's switch over directly to the Axonius platform, and I will demonstrate. So when we log into Axonius, we get a lovely, if not highly technical, dashboard. The premise that I've talked about that Axonius operates on is that we can reach out to all of these various solutions that are in place inside the business, already trusted, already validated in their own right, on a periodic basis. This is what we call the system lifecycle. You'll see there's a Discover Now button, and that can be done manually if you want to. But typically, this happens twice a day, where the discovery kicks in and it goes and fetches from every single one of these variety of adapters, what we call adapters. So ServiceNow, McAfee, all of these kind of various sources for devices, all of these various sources for users, and then aggregates them all. So what we have is a very clear picture of 4,796 unique devices. All of those various adapters brought in 19,000. Some of them were duplicates. And when we overlay them with one another, aggregate and correlate, guess what? 4,796. Same with the users. So how do we do this? We do it with what we call adapters. And the adapter list looks like this. In this example, we've got 49 configured adapters of 967. So if you could list maybe 10 or 50 different systems that you use inside of your business, like Active Directory, Nozomi, Clarity, Qualys, Tenable.io, Tanium, any one of those solutions that we've already got configured here, we're bringing in their data. And of course, there are umpteen more, loads and loads and loads of them. All the various categories that you can imagine have got adapters in here, including HR systems, IPAM systems, user management systems, license management systems, right through to Zoom. All of those kind of things are all available for configuration inside of the Axonius platform. So let's take a look at one specific one. I've opened up specific tabs here so that we can just switch between them really quickly. This one is Active Directory. It's probably the simplest one that most of us have got some knowledge of. The essence of creating a connection with an adapter inside the Axonius platform is very simply put an IP address or a host name in there, a port number if it's not going to be 389 or 3389 or whatever, and a username and password. Axonius then goes to Active Directory and says, hey, give me all of your devices. And you can check a box to say, fetch all the disabled devices, pull out all the deleted devices, find users which are disabled. All of these kind of things are configuration items. There is more detailed configuration in the advanced view, but we're not going to look at that right now. But does that give you an idea of how easy it is to connect an adapter? So let's imagine, pardon me, just taking a little rabbit hole here real quick. Let's imagine we were able to stand up an Axonius platform, maybe a demo instance, inside of our SaaS-hosted platform. That could take 15 minutes for it to be set up, installed, ready to roll. Log into it. Let's go and find the Active Directory adapter. Let's put our username and password in there, and let's push save and fetch. Within 15 minutes of that, we could have a lovely inventory of all of the systems and all of the users that Active Directory knows about inside of our business. I mean, yes, okay, we could be pointing it at a global catalog and we might have 1 million users. That might take an hour or two. But that gives you a really clear idea of how quick it is to get a comprehensive picture just of Active Directory. Now overlay that with maybe other sources, maybe your EDR, Cylance or Sentinel-1 or CrowdStrike or whatever it is that's in place inside the business. And we can very quickly, it does it in the background, fetches all of that data and then normalizes it, correlates it, and aggregates it to produce a lovely picture of every single device. So remember that 4796 we talked about at the beginning? This is what we're looking at here. So we started off on the dashboard. We're now into the asset view. We're looking at devices. Devices is sort of like the default. That's where most people spend a lot of their time. But you could easily spend your time as an HR person deep down inside of the users. So now this is where we start talking about use cases. So right up till now, all I've talked about is the platform. I didn't say that this is a security platform. I didn't say it's an HR platform. I didn't say it's an operations platform. Each of those have got their own individual use cases. There are so many that we can talk about. But let's talk about the second thing that I mentioned. There are three things that Axonius does really well. And the first is this credible inventory. So that 4796 is the absolute total. You'll see that each one of these devices is informed by multiple sources. And when a source brings data, if we expand one of these, when a source brings data, you'll see the data that it can bring. So, the fact that this is a recent device, so let's see when it was last seen, this morning. But it was last seen 4 days ago from Cisco Meraki. It was last seen a week ago by Nexpose. So Rapid7 Nexpose maybe did a scan on this device a week ago. Well, no, actually 2 weeks ago now, sorry, I'm not concentrating. But all the same, you'll see that it's correlated typically on, and in this example, IP address and MAC address. There was a host name out here too. Can you see all of these systems have delivered the exact same name in host name? But let's take a look at one of these devices really, really quickly. I want you to get a sense of the data that's aggregated for every single device. So every single device, when we fetch it from Active Directory, from Clarity, from Forescout, Jamf, McAfee, all of these various sources, it's all overlaid into one big table. Sometimes there are tables inside of these tables. So here's an asset unique ID history. That's a table in its own right. Open ports is a table in its own right. This machine has 4 of them. It looks like a Windows machine to me that's doing email and web at the same time. I wonder if that's IIS. Oh, but it's an OS X server. It doesn't matter. I mean, this is kind of created data in the sense that it's a demo platform, right? But there's an installed software list. All of these things are fields that we can now go and query on. Does that make sense? So if I wanted to look at something very, very specific, like maybe Tanium client, I'm able to see, yes, there's a Tanium client ID. I know that it's an adaptive property of an agent, and so on. So all of those are things that I can go and query. Let's imagine that we wanted to find all of the systems which are not running our Tanium client. So we've got a query wizard. Now that is not cool. We have a query wizard that we can exercise to build queries. And I've never, in all my years of computing, seen anything quite as cool as this. So it looks very simple here, but let's just build out a query. So I'm going to say, all right, I want to see where the Tanium client ID exists. So I've just clicked twice and I've already got a query that's going to show me all of the systems. Remember, out of those 4,700, I've got 1,017 where the Tanium client exists. I'm more interested, though, if this system is a Windows system. Equals Windows. So now we know out of that 1,017 that there are going to be 509 of them are Windows devices. So I'm guessing a bunch of them may not have been Windows. In other words, maybe OS X, maybe Linuxy things or whatever. But why do I want to know this? Well, because I want to find all of the systems which are Windows and that I've seen perhaps in the last 30 days. So let's go last seen in the last 30 days. I wonder if that number is going to be different. So in the last 30 days, I know that these are kind of valid machines. They're not kind of, what's the word, deprecated or yes, scheduled for destruction or have been disabled for whatever reason, or the person's on holiday, whatever it is. So this point here is, I want to know all of the systems. Actually, I made a mistake. I want to know all the systems that don't have Tanium and that are Windows last seen in the last 30 days. Right, there are 511. So what can I do with this list? I might be interested in saying, all right, let's export this list. This is kind of what people would have done in the old days, right? They would have taken 2 or 3 or 4, 10 spreadsheets, tried to overlay them, tried to align them, and now they've got this list of machines. Now, what are you going to do about that? Going to give it to some person, and he's going to run around like a chicken with its head chopped off and say, I've got to deploy a Tanium client. I've got to deploy a Tanium client 511 times. That would be awful. All I need to do here is, this is now going to be the third leg of this whole piece, create an enforcement action. So what enforcement can we do here? There are hundreds of different enforcements. So these ones, if I just paint it like this, you'll kind of see where we're going. I can tag them all. I can send an email. I can activate Slack and send a Slack message to somebody. I might be able to say, create an incident. So immediately there is this list dropped into maybe ServiceNow or Zendesk or Jira or wherever. But the most useful one, I think, is deploying files and running commands. So in this example, we might want to set up a chef recipe if we're using chef, or maybe just run deploy files and run commands on Windows machines. So obviously, yes, we're going to need to have some credentials to do that, but typically we've already put those credentials in by using the adapter we talked about. We can very quickly deploy this. We can put a command here. We can upload a file. Additional fields. Here's the file to deploy. I'll drop an MSI in here. That is my Tanium client. Guess what? I've solved a problem in a matter of about 3 minutes. How many devices don't have the Tanium client that are Windows seen in the last 30 days? Problem solved. I can now go home because I've done my job for the day. I didn't have my head chopped off either. So that really gives a very, very quick idea of the sort of things that we can do. I mean, we looked specifically here at at devices that are missing maybe an agent. Yeah, it would be trivial to do that exact same query and say, all right, I'm interested. Let's do this really quickly. Tanium. So Tanium client ID exists, but hasn't been seen. Sorry, Tanium client last seen in the last 7 days. Because remember, Tanium is an online system, it's active all the time. We expect to be seeing Tanium solutions reporting all the time. I could down this to even 2 days, because if it's not reporting in the last 2 days, guess what? That agent is broken or the machine is dead. So we can put other queries in here to say, all right, show me all of the systems that are known. So actually last seen from any other system. So when I'm using this big X, that's the total aggregate number. It's not any one of these specific adapters. Can you see the distinction I'm making here? The last seen is in the last 7 days. So when it's not seen in the last 7 days, but it does have a Tanium client installed on it, there are 161 of these. Can you see the Tanium data? Tanium data is showing up here in each of these devices. So we know for a fact that the Tanium client is installed on there, because that's what Tanium is telling us. I've said, show me all of those that have not been seen in the last 7 days. So in other words, Tanium knows it's been installed, but it hasn't seen that device. Yes, you could go and ask the Tanium operator for this thing, but he's going to give you a much longer list. Why? Because they've got systems there that might have been deprecated long ago, and they didn't know about it. So this is where this, is my agent operational, is a really important question, almost more important than is my agent installed everywhere it should be. Anyway, that gives you a very quick idea of what we're trying to focus on here. So how about if we try to do some kind of asset investigation? This is another really, really cool tool. Remember, I told you about all of the sources of data that are bringing in, port numbers in this example, sizes of hard drives, types of processor, how many network adapters there are, all of those kind of things. So we could say, all right, I'm interested in open ports. Let's try and look where that value has changed over a period of time. So this is very simply a reflection of the huge amount of data that we're storing after every single discovery cycle has ended. Remember, I told you it's happening typically twice a day. Now, over the last probably 6 months is the default view, but I'm just going to say over the last number of months, this thing has been bringing in information about open ports from various sources, and this one specifically tells me that's Tenable SC. The values that have been added and the values which have been removed. Oh, look here, here's a system that is showing 3306, so that's MySQL, isn't it? We can go and dig into this device and look specifically at the data that belongs to it. Remember, I told you that some of the data that is fetched is displayed as a table, and we can show a table specifically with the open ports. So this is the current list of open ports that is shown as fetched from Tenable SC. So 8443.80.80.3306. Aha, all right, so we know that now. And we can delve deeper into this and say, all right, well, tell me what software is installed in this thing. It doesn't correlate right now because this is, this is sort of aggregated data in a demo platform. But you can get the sense of where I'm going with this and how quickly it is possible to identify, if we had brought in information about actual software from, some other discovery cycle, we would know that there is MySQL in this system. That's just one very, very simple example of how it is possible to drill into this. Oh boy, it looks like every single one of my tabs has crashed on this thing.
Leslie, before you go to the next thing you want to show, we have a question from Angelo. So he has two questions actually. Axonius is extremely nice. Can it be used to provision new users and roles to external systems, such as setting up new SAP users? Let's maybe start with the first question.
SAP, not that I'm aware of, but again, one of the things is that everything that we have here is I'm going to say dependent on having a customer need for that thing. We haven't just gone out and created thousands of adapters and thousands of actions hoping that someone's going to use it, right? So in the case of SAP, it would be trivial. And in fact, I've got a feeling that we have a SAP adapter at the very least. Let's have a look at that really quickly. I'll go back to my adapters page. And let's go SAP. Right. So we do have a bunch of SAP adapters, various ones. So this is probably the most likely one that we want to go in from that point of view, but yeah, it might be Concur or anything. As I was looking at the enforcement actions, let's just look here, SAP. Right, there we go. So create a user, modify user, delete user, all of these are making use of that existing adapter connection that we have and being able to do some kind of action based off of modifying a user. Or does that kind of make sense, Angelo?
If not, maybe Angelo, we can easily have a follow-up discussion and discuss your specific use case in detail. I think if just let us know if you're interested. And the second question, do you have a real life use cases where Axonius saves customers on the software licensing fees?
We have several customers who've reported very, very good results with software licensing. That becomes actually one of the use cases which I had looked at. If I switch across, sorry, I'll just have to move this tab across there. Sorry, a bunch of these things just didn't work properly. So from a user's point of view, we can look very clearly at users. We've talked about devices. You've kind of seen that I was looking at vulnerabilities in one of the previous screens, but we could look at users. We could see assigned software, or we could look at software itself. We need to understand that from all of this data that we're fetching, from all of the various adapters, some of them bring explicitly installed software lists, but we can also take information from, let's just say, SCCM. SCCM's job is to be an agent on a machine and tell us about that machine, but it does also know about installed software. So we can go and say, show me all of the data from SCCM or MECM nowadays, and show me all of the machines where a piece of software is installed. That's trivial. If I do that, let me show you that really, really quickly. Is it this tab? This tab was our devices tab. So if I reset this question really quickly, and if I say query wizard MECM installed software exists, and then I can go and do something like this. This is where stuff gets incredibly powerful. In fact, I'm going to do a complex. This is I'm not going to explain all of this. I'll just simply say using a complex field allows me to delve into those tables that we talked about. Remember, I showed you the ports. Now I'm going to do installed software as my table, and I want to see a software name that includes, I don't know, I wonder if there's going to be any Adobe. Aren't we lucky? 16 of our devices have got Adobe something or other installed. Now, if I want to see what that installed software list looks like, I could have chosen to expose that. So I'll just add that as a column in my query. So here is the full list of all of the pieces of software. I have a filter mechanism where I can now break this out. Contains Adobe. Whoops. Adobe. And it'll show me only that piece of information. It is so cool, so capable, and so, okay. I didn't expect to see that. But anyway, Adobe Flash Player shows up in exactly 16 of these machines. Now, what can I go and do? Remember, we can execute on this. We can issue this as a list, to export as a CSV for somebody to operate on, or create some action based on that thing. Given that it's MECM, we could probably uninstall that piece of software for whatever reason, or given that these are all, okay, Windows 11 is there, but Windows 2000, these are really, really old machines. This might trigger a different process to say, hey, let's go and find all the machines which are due for replacement and replace them. So you can see where we're going with this whole premise, and how we can build comprehensive actions off of the back of seemingly intractable questions. Now, there's a broader question at heart, and that is, when we look at users, when we look at, sorry, I'm just going to refresh these two in the background. When we start looking at Enforcement Center and the things that we can do in Enforcement Center, or when we look at users and how their lists of installed of software that they're associated with, or investigate users for what we would typically call blast radius, for example. In other words, if a user, let's just go and find, I don't know, let's look at Roy, and look at what applications he's using, what various resources he's got, what machines, see asset unique ID, asset history, what machines has Roy been associated with. And that becomes really, really useful when we're trying to understand, when Roy's password is compromised, where do we have exposure? And that is a particularly difficult use case to figure out really, really quickly. So, I mean, we could do this from an asset graph point of view, and we could say, all right, let's look at Roy and let's go and find what he's connected to in terms of devices. We already know that there are two, but I want to illustrate this really, really quickly. So we could say, yes, there are two devices. And we could simply say, explore the connections of these devices to various, maybe SaaS applications. Let's take a look at that. No SaaS applications. Hang on, maybe I need to split this out. Ungroup that. Oh, SaaS applications associated with a user. Let's go to applications rather. Did you see that? That's a Windows machine and an iOS. So clearly, Roy has been using a portable alongside of his Windows device. Now I could say, all right, let's explore the connections or segment this by various things. And we could say, all right, what about applications or vulnerabilities? Let's go and see what vulnerabilities. Oh, there's no relationship there either. I'm going off the off very quick network devices, network software. I'm going off a very quick fly, just down into the deep end really, really quickly. But that gives you a sense of the sort of things that you can query for in terms of what's the impact of something happening on our network or with a user, and now needing as a operations person to delve into this, or a security operations person to delve into this. We've talked very briefly about the Enforcement Center. I want to have one last quick view of the SaaS application. So I talked about all of these adapters. Part of the adapter stuff that we bring in is SaaS related. So if you'd connected an Okta, if you'd connected your Google Workspace, if you'd connected Azure, for example, or other Microsoft tooling, we would soon know which SaaS applications there are in place inside of our business. So this is a very kind of constructive asset graph that we've built based off of this question: show me all of my SaaS applications. Then expand all of those applications and show me all of the extensions which those applications have. So in other words, where are users associated with these SaaS applications? Segment by source application. So in other words, show me where all the sources of those are, and then ungroup them by all of those things and show them up as ungrouped SaaS applications. So in this example, we could use Microsoft as a starting point because we know that Microsoft is used for authentication, or Okta in this case is heavily used by this demo organization as a provider of authorization. So any number of users might be using Okta, but it's associated with 60 different extensions. So ADP, AWS, there's Adobe stuff, Envoy, Expensify, Jamf, all of these various SaaS applications. But it also highlights that there are people who are using Visual Studio who are not authorized, or Visual Studio is not an authorized application in the sense that it's not provisioned inside of Okta. So we could take Visual Studio and say, all right, show me all of the users that are associated with Visual Studio. Segment by entity, or explore connections. Find out which accounts, or in fact, let's try accounts first. No connection there. Let's try users or user extensions. This is not working out for me. But anyway, you get the sense of where we're going with the sense of what is it that the corporation is using as SaaS applications. And the funny thing is that a lot of organizations, when you say to them, hey, how many SaaS applications do you have? Inevitably, they'll go to the finance people and they'll say, well, what are we paying for? Yeah, AWS, yes. Microsoft, yes. Okta, yes. Google Workspace, yes. But not realize that there's all of these other things, HubSpot, Expensify that I showed you, Jamf, all related to these origin sources of authentication, for example. I want to spend just a minute while we're thinking about this.
Leslie, one more question popped up here from Thomas. He has one question. One of the tricky questions for us is, who owns this server? How does Axonius solve this? Can we use manual fields on assets if there is no automatic solution?
Absolutely, yes. So that's one thing which I failed to mention when we were here in the asset view. And in fact, I think it shows up if we scroll a little bit here. Here is this concept of tags, right? So we can tag things. We can also put custom data onto these devices. So I'm going to choose a specific device here. And amongst all of these adapter connections, we've got the concept of custom data. Now, custom data could be anything. You'll see that there's a terrific amount of risk-related stuff in here because risk is particular to every organization. There's no way that Axonius is simply going to say, hey, this is a Windows server, it's got IIS on it, or blah, blah. It doesn't matter. You can build this out, whatever data you want to add on there. Now, how do we do that? We do that simply by using the enforcement center. And we could say, here's an example. Missing snow tag. Well, hang on, I wonder if we've already got one. Owner. All right, there we go. Here's an example of one. This one simply says, let's find which systems should have. No, I don't like that query. That doesn't make sense. Or maybe that is the list of systems, because all of these enforcements, like I showed you from the beginning, are based on some query output. So the query is, show me all of the servers which have got, a certain identity or a certain piece of software installed on them. So we talked about MySQL just now. So show me all of the servers where MySQL is installed. Those servers are all owned by the MySQL team, in this thing. So let's have a quick look at this query. Oh, this is a simple one. So where all of the OS types equals Windows, that's the category that we're interested in querying. Let's close that really quickly. Where all of the Windows, where all of the devices are OS equals Windows, then put a tag on there. That's the action name, tag action 01, John's assets. So if we went to every single Windows device and looked at it, it should have a tag, John's assets. And that's kind of the easy way of doing it. Now, that's one of the actions that we can do inside of Enforcement Center. But remember, sorry, I shouldn't say remember because I haven't mentioned it yet. But one of the features of the Enforcement Center is being able to do multiple things inside of an enforcement action. So let's just find here. Here's an example. This is an example where we're doing a query, whatever this thing is, devices not in CMDB, so maybe a ServiceNow. The main action here is ServiceNow create assets. So in other words, we're going to, when we find systems which are not in the CMDB, in other words, they don't have an ID that comes from ServiceNow, go and create that asset. If that action was successful, then send an email, issue a message to the syslog, and tell Splunk that we've done something. However, if this action, in other words, create an asset for the thing that we've just discovered inside of Axonius, if that fails, create an incident in ServiceNow to say, hey, I couldn't create this asset, and send an email again and send another syslog message. So there are incredible number of things that can be done based off of some or other sequence that needs to be accomplished inside of the server. I mean, or inside of the the platform that's in question. So we've got dozens and dozens of just simple examples. There are a bunch of predefined sets. So there are examples when we create a new Axonius platform. There are examples of how to create enforcement sets. But technical account managers will also be able to help users create very custom enforcements. Now,
so long story short, maybe to answer Thomas' question, in a perfect world, or in most cases, it should be possible based on the data to really automatically tag ownership for the devices. If this is for whatever reason, I can't think of many use cases where this is not possible. It would also be possible to manually tag them, or even create a manual field and write the ownership into there. But I would say in 95% of the cases, it should be possible to automatically assign ownership.
Correct. That's a very astute observation, Lars. I forgot to mention that. I always want to go down the automation route, but yeah. So I've chosen this one specific device where you can apply a tag, you can run an enforcement action on one specific thing, you can create a custom field, you can filter out stuff, open up in Graph, you can delete this device if it's not relevant to whatever it is. But for the most part, I've not seen people using things like delete devices because, there's automation that's just going to bring it back. If a system doesn't belong there, then there are better ways of crafting queries that prevent devices from being there in the first place. So, that kind of brings a very, very quick summary of what we can do in the platform. We've not really explored a lot of the sort of background capabilities that happen, while discovery is going on, what takes place in the normalization. I mentioned normalization more than once, but there are scenarios where let's just drill into one of these devices, and when we look at the actual raw data that's brought by various systems, we're not going to be able to see it now, I don't think. Yeah, so very often you'll find in the raw data, there might be, okay, he has a AMD Ryzen processor. Intel MAC address. So, you know, when stuff comes from Windows, for example, Windows doesn't use the colon as a separator. It uses a dash. Let's try and see if it shows up here. And this is kind of the illustration of where normalization is so crucial to the existence of the data in this platform. What we do is normalize that data so it can overlay, and so that we can say, oh, this is the same as that. It doesn't matter where the origin of that data is. So, you know, that's kind of what I want to illustrate, that happens way down in the very lowest parts of Axonius. I mean, we can look at very specific devices and see what tags have been added on to the device. You can add notes onto it. You can look at what's changed inside of this device. So over a period of time, it's brought new data. So MECM must have been added on the 14th of the 4th, and brought a lot of information, you know, relating to the device from MECM. This is one simple example of the sorts of things that we can do. Now, one of the things which we haven't really looked at in any detail is, let's go back into this device and look at the last used user. This is kind of what I'm illustrating, is the relationship, is the best term, the relationship that we have between users, devices, software. You can see how this becomes a very circular approach to looking at the data that's inside of here. So if we went to that user, so now I'm back in the users table. Remember, we were in the devices table previously. Now I'm in the users table. I'm looking at Dolores Mancini, and I can go and look at unique asset history and look explicitly at what device that person is associated with, and then look at what software, what extensions they're linked with. Can you see here? Source applications, Microsoft Workspaces. What IDs do they have? What associated devices? So this was the machine that we've just come from. Looking at what they're associated with. All of these nested groups. The point really here is that whichever way that we want to slice or dice the data, or filter it, or query it, or find things which aren't there, because remember that we've got a very comprehensive picture now of all of these machines, it's easy to find the ones which are outside of our predefined scope. And whether that scope is all users need to be signed in with single sign-on. Again, that would be a really, really trivial field to go and find. You would be able to draw a graph on the dashboard. So earlier, just before we were talking, before we started here, Lars said to me, "All right, can you show me all of the devices that are brought by Clarity?" Clarity being one of the operational technology adapters that we have. So I said, yeah, absolutely sure, we can do that. And this was a query which I built in the space of 2 minutes. Show me all of the different types of asset types that Clarity knows about. This is what we saw. I wonder if I can extend this. If I do edit, I think I get to choose. Sorry, I've done something silly. Cancel that. There is supposed to be a way to extend this view here. Sorry, resize the chart. There we go. So those are the different types of data. It's what I'm trying to say is it is so easy to build charts and graphs on the dashboard. So for example, if I wanted to show you, I was looking earlier on at the SaaS management executive overview, which is kind of a really nice graph, or an explanation of the things that we do with graphs. So users per SaaS application. So somebody was asking earlier on about the valid users versus invalid users, and how we can save expense on licenses which are unused. That's one way. Some vendor risk, all to do with compliance items. Here we go. Inactive paid users per application. So Google Workspace 271. How does it know that? It knows that simply by using queries. We can go and look at the queries behind this chart. Wouldn't be difficult. Direct assigned application name, inactive paid users is the real question. So, that's how easy it is to build charts. I'm wondering if I've got an example of, let's go 853, because this is a compliance chart. I wonder if there's going to be a rundown. I haven't seen, okay, there's a trend chart, devices with public IPs. So somebody's obviously had a real issue with devices showing up with public IP addresses. And all we want to do is over the last month, in other words, looking back over the last month, can we find, the devices with public IP addresses? So you could do the same with if we're implementing MFA. We need to have MFA enabled for every single actual user. In other words, not a service account, an actual user. We can do that. We can build a chart that shows how all of these users enable their single sign-on as they go through.
Leslie, we only have a couple of minutes left. There is one specific question that we just received from Tanya. She wants to know how Axonius handles vulnerabilities. Maybe you can show this part.
I skipped over that one when we looked at the when we looked at the user at the user question. So I had a tab already prepared for vulnerabilities, and I'm sorry, Tanya, that I didn't spend enough time on this one. So as part of the collection of data from all of these adapters, you'll see that some adapters like Tenable.io, Tenable.sc, and AWS in this example, there is a Rapid7 Nexpose. Axonius does fetch vulnerability data. What we do is we build a specific table with vulnerabilities in. The identifier here is the vulnerability ID. So, all the CVE numbers that are existing inside of our business are showing up here. So what we can now do is exactly immediately show the association of 2024-21887 with all the devices that have brought that vulnerability. So there are 86 devices with this vulnerability associated with them, brought from Tenable.sc. But what do all of these other pictures mean? They mean that there is enrichment happening. So Tenable.sc brings the data in, very simply saying, I saw this vulnerability on this device. Now, what Axonius does in the background is enrich the data with stuff from NVD. It enriches the data with other things that we find in installed software lists, for example. It enriches the data from the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities list. So I can now go and run a query that simply says, show me if something is known in the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities list. So we've got 840 vulnerabilities there. Let's see how many are known to CISA. So 37. All right, maybe I'm more interested in systems that have got, I don't know, installed software name includes Apache. I'm just going to go off in the deep end here, and I'm going to see if any of those systems contain Apache. As it happens, there's exactly one. So I'm guessing that this vulnerability might be associated with Apache, but that's beside the point. This is kind of going to be, or what else I could have done is public IP address. So this is a publicly exposed exists. Oops. Public IPs exists. So how many of these devices that have CISA known exploited vulnerabilities also have public IPs? In other words, they're exposed to the internet directly. So there are 4 and 4 and 3. I'm guessing that's the same machines that show up. We'd have to click on it to go and see. But let's take a quick look. I want to show you, looking at a device, how we see all of this information. As it turns out, these are all AWS devices. But I want to simply illustrate where this data exists. So we're back in the device page. You've seen this page before. we can look at tables, and in amongst this table is vulnerable software. There's also things like plugin information that comes directly from Tenable, but let's take a look at this one. And there it is. There's the exact vulnerability that we queried. Now I can go and click on this and it'll open up the NVD page to tell me exactly what this correlates with, but it might also show me, so local privilege escalation was found on pkexec utility, Polkit's pkexec utility. So there's something in that machine which is kind of very specific, and this was brought by AWS. It's enriched by CISA Kev, and enriched by EPSS, and enriched by NVD. So I think that kind of paints a really interesting picture of how we can deal with these kind of vulnerabilities really, really quickly and build, could you say, a methodology to prioritize on vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and maybe from a handling perspective, it's from my point of view also something that is really important. So if there is a specific vulnerability that pops up and you want to know, am I vulnerable, and what is the real potential impact in my environment, you can query how Leslie showed it. But if you design your vulnerability management program around severities, around whatever, you can also create enforcements and really automate this process to really be informed and take action on something that comes automatically into Axonius, and you don't have to query all that stuff on a daily basis. This is not about having a mature process. So being able to query on a specific immediate case is one big advantage, but also being able to create enforcements and automate all the actions behind it. Okay,
so as you were saying that, I was just thinking, I mean, there's probably going to be queries that people have written here. Vulnerability, sorry. You know, there are all sorts of queries that people could. Okay, low vulns, critical vulns, vulnerable assets not validated with NVD. There are all sorts of questions: vulnerable Android devices, vulnerable iOS devices, high risk active, vulnerable EUC, whatever. You know, there are loads of queries that one can build based on some or other query. Sorry.
Yeah,
Lars.
Leslie, we're running out of time, and we have actually one maybe last question with a short answer from Angelo. What about custom adapters? How does that work? So if you have a data source that doesn't have a predefined adapter.
There are two answers to this, and they're both good. So if it's a fairly standard piece of software, in other words, it's something which has a published API, or it's a public vendor, if you want to call it that, then we can build that really, really quickly. It takes, you know, from a few days to maybe a week or two to build a new adapter. And we're adding in new adapters every single week. There's, you know, half a dozen adapters which are added. If it's a solution that is particular to your organization, let's just say you, I'm just going to say Nestle, and Nestle's got all of these fancy in-house systems that they've built over a period of time. Some of those systems might have an API associated with them, but their in-house tooling. We can absolutely build custom adapters which are in-house designed for Nestle. So that they would have their own adapter. Let's just call it Nestle 123. You know, so that's their adapter for pulling out numbers from a finance system. That's entirely possible. We have got numbers of customers that have got their own custom adapters, which are designed only for them.
Okay, so we're already 1 minute past the hour. So Leslie, I would say we could talk easily for another 3 or 4 hours on use cases. We already saw maybe additional use cases we haven't touched. So if you have any specific use cases, any specific ideas you want to have covered, just reach out to me, reach out to Andy, and we are more than happy to set up a custom session where we can discuss your specific requirements, your specific use cases. Thank you for all of you who spent time with us. Thank you, Leslie for being again with us. So Leslie is the first of our guest of our events that has been with us twice. So that's also something that
That's
it's the
honorable.
first
Thanks,
time, first time in our long series of events. As I mentioned, we will send out the link to the recording probably tomorrow. If you have a colleague who was not able to join, just hand over the recording, the link to the recording. And this is the last event of before the summer break. Yeah, we watch out for additional invitations. There will be more events later this year. And yeah, thank you to all of one. Have a great afternoon and see you maybe in a follow-up session, quite short term, or at the latest after the summer break. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.